Hello friends. So today's video is going to be a reading vlog. I have a lot of books that I'm going to be picking up here soon that I know a lot of you really love as well, so I thought it'd be fun to kind of bring you along. First, this is one that is a little lesser known. It's a newer series, and I mentioned it in my last reading vlog, Liar's Knot. I'm buddy reading this with my friend Joanna. The first one is very intense on the fantasy aspects. It's kind of a challenge. You really have to focus as you're reading the story because there's a lot of scheming, there's a lot going on, there's a lot of people, there's a lot of fantasy names, there's different kinds of magic systems. It's got this somewhat Venetian setting. I've mentioned it a few times now. And this second book, it is doing a good job of sort of reminding you who's who and what's what at the beginning, but it definitely is one that if you do want to pick up the series, you probably want to take your time with. I'm usually somebody who likes to devour my books, but this is one where I have to take my time with it. I will also be picking up the Farseer trilogy by Robin Hobb. I've read the first one, so I'm going to be picking up books 2 and 3, hopefully both of them. They're both very chunky, and I know they're both quite downers when it comes to the emotional aspects, so I think it's going to make me very sad, but that's okay. I'm excited to get back to it finally because I've wanted to pick up Robin Hobb for so long. And so I think this is a good time. Plus, Erin from Booked and Busy asked me if I wanted to join in on the Ship of Magic read-along that she's hosting. And I was like, yes. And so that's the motivation I needed to get back into Farseer and try to finish that before Ship of Magic. So I believe we're going to be doing a reading sprint hopefully this Saturday over on Erin's channel, which by the time this goes up means that it should already be available, and then you can go back and watch it if you didn't see it then. I'll have Erin's channel linked. She reads so many books that I know so many of you love. She does so much. I don't know how she does it all, but she's fabulous. So definitely check out Erin. So I'm also, besides Farseer, picking up Ship of Magic. I've heard great things. I've heard even if you don't love the original Farseer trilogy, that the Life Ship Traders series is still one to try out. My friend Ingrid has said that. And speaking of my friend Ingrid, we are buddy reading Mistborn this week. We just finished the first book, and Ingrid and then our friend Roger, I'll have their channels linked as well. We are continuing on with our reread with the Well of Ascension this week. And then similar to what I just said about Farseer and Ship of Magic, by the time this goes up, we'll have probably finished this one and be jumping into the Hero of Ages. But I am doing this buddy read along with my patrons. So we're doing reading sprints over there. We will have a live show over there, and there's a Discord channel over there. If you would like to check that out, I'll have it linked. But either way, it's been super fun. One, because this is one of my favorite series of all time. This is my third time reading it. And what's really, really fun is that Ingrid, she had read the first book, but not the second and third. So this will be her first time reading those. Roger's read the trilogy once, so this is his second time, and then this is my third time. So we're all at different levels. So it's just really fun to get to see the things that stand out to Ingrid and then the things that are puzzling her and the things that she's like, what is going on here? And the answers that she's craving. And then with Roger, it's fun for him and for me to see foreshadowing things, but it's fun because there's certain things that I caught before that like he sees now and he's like, oh my gosh, this person. It's just been really fun to chat with them about it because if you've read Mistborn, you know that as you get through it, the reveals, because book 1 and book 2 don't feel like they're all that related, and then the way everything ties together in book 3, and you're like, what? And then you go back and look and you're like, wait, that was there the whole time. And you get really excited, right? That's what you want. That's what you want whenever you're going to go back and reread a series or when you get to the end of a series. So this has been a really great, fun read-along, buddy read, and I'm so excited to be jumping back into it. That already is plenty of books, and a lot of really big books, big fantasy books too, but they're all rather, I don't want to say taxing because that sounds so negative, but they are demanding of your attention and they're demanding of your emotions, and some of them are kind of Debbie Downers. So if I can, I mentioned this at the end of my previous vlog, if I can, I'm going to try to pick up 10,000 Stitches, which I believe comes out this week. And it is in the same world as Half a Soul, which I picked up recently and thought it was adorable, thanks to Jessie May. She mentioned it in one of my patron sprints, and she said it was cute. And I was like, I mean, I'm always down for a cute story. And it was adorable, but also had great, I guess you could say, commentary on PTSD and the way that society is great at turning a blind eye to atrocities and the negative things going on in the world, while at the same time being a delightfully charming story and a love story. And it's fantasy, and it was just adorable. It was perfect to read alongside some of these other things. And I saw that 10,000 Stitches comes out this week, and I'm like, oh, I could use that with some of these other books that I'm planning on reading. I definitely could use something that's more of a pick-me-up, maybe when I'm cleaning or doing laundry, and I'm like, I don't know if I can take the sad stuff right now, and I just need something upbeat. Maybe that'll be the thing that I read. We'll see. I have so much else to read, though, so that's the plans so far. And now let's look at cute shots of Luna Bear, because what else are vlogs good for but seeing Luna Bear?
Oh, so much room.
You a happy girl? Yeah? Yeah, happy girl. Happy girl. Luna. Her like weird leaning butt. Oh, you got your rope? Stay. All right, so going over all of the books that I got around to this last week, I am so excited because so many of them I ended up really, really enjoying, but I do have one in particular that I will just have to tell you about here in a second. So here's all of the books that I got around to this last week. Just a reminder, although I've said it enough times that I think all of you know this is my third read through of Mistborn. So I flew through this. I stayed up basically all night and read this. And it was just as good as I remembered, if not better. I absolutely love the amount of time that we take to dissect not just the political maneuverings of different characters, but also the moral questions that go alongside being somebody who is responsible for an entire city of people. Being a ruler, what does that take? Can you actually preserve your integrity and your decency while still being a good ruler? And I just love the moral questions that come up. I don't think they're done in a cliche way. I don't think they're surface level. I think we really dive into what it takes and sometimes the sacrifices you have to make to your own morals. So I really liked that. On top of that, I just felt like the Well of Ascension, it never stops. There's just always something. As soon as it feels like, okay, we've got a grasp on things, so now we can plan, something else comes into the picture and now we have to readjust. And I feel like that keeps me on the edge of my seat, more so than action scenes, of which there are action scenes that are phenomenal in this book. But in general, I just think the second book is perhaps my favorite. I mean, the first time, the third one is obviously the end of the trilogy. Everything wraps up. There's all these reveals, how everything is tied together. You finally get to appreciate, but on reread, this one is, I guess you could say, the most entertaining. I feel like that's too shallow of a word to describe it, but it's the one that probably keeps me the most engaged. So absolutely love my read through. I do understand, though, for people that don't care about the political sides of stories as much as I do, why this one is perhaps not as much of a favorite, but I absolutely loved it. I have started the third one since having completed that one. And it was funny, I was telling Sean, we were walking Luna Bear, and I was telling him how the third one is just so doom and gloom. And I think that Brandon Sanderson manages to have that in the tone of the story as well. So the circumstances are very dire. They're definitely having to deal with way more. The stakes have been raised to the extreme. So you'd expect everybody to feel overwhelmed, but it just seeps through the page, and then you end up feeling that as well. Much happier after that, we have 10,000 Stitches. So this follows Half a Soul. You could technically read this one on its own because for the most part, it's brand new characters. One of the characters did make a very brief appearance in Half a Soul, and now they are kind of one of the main characters, but essentially it's a new story with a new cast of characters, and there are little nods to characters from the first book. But if you wanted to just jump into this one, you could. I'd recommend starting with Half a Soul. I actually did like Half a Soul more than this one, although this one was still absolutely delightful and a great time. Very charming. I used the word charming to describe Half a Soul, and I would say that for this one as well. If you're interested in hearing more about Half a Soul, I'll have some videos linked so you can hear more about it. But this one follows a young maid who is just kind of down on her luck. The people that she works for are not particularly kind, and she doesn't have a lot going for her in life. She doesn't have a lot to fall back on. and so her work is filling up her entire day. And she finds herself suddenly falling head over heels for one of the rich men that is related to the people she works for, and she's like, oh my gosh, if only I was a proper lady, and then maybe I could wed him. And she's just so in the clouds. And she happens, though, to meet what is essentially her fairy godfather, this fairy who is determined to try and figure out how to be a good person. And he happens to meet our main character, Effie, and is like, I can help you. I'll try to make you into this woman, this lady, this proper lady. And so it's kind of a Cinderella retelling. And it's very, very sweet, and it's very cute. But just like with Half a Soul, there are some little things woven in, no pun intended, to the story that are more serious in nature, kind of workplace conditions and the differences between people and their opportunities in life and status and those sorts of things. And so I really have been enjoying these because the romances are really sweet. They're just delicious, syrupy sweetness, but at the same time, there are some serious things in there. But overall, those serious things are presented to you in a way that is still easy to take in and doesn't make you feel really depressed, which I'm all down for the depressing stuff. Like I said with Well of Ascension, I like reflecting on all these moral questions and things like that, but sometimes it's nice to have something that feels very fun. And I want to add too, I am a big fan of both adult and young adult fantasy, and I find a lot of times the cute or the happy comes more in young adult, and so it's also really refreshing and fun to find it in adult fantasy. After that, we have Liar's Knot, the sequel to Mask of Mirrors. I've said before that Mask of Mirrors is a very difficult book in how fantasy heavy it is. There's just so many new names to take in. There's a lot to the magic. There's different kinds of magic systems, and then there's different houses, and a lot of the houses are kind of scheming against each other, and then you have main characters who are trying to manipulate the houses in their own ways. And so sometimes it can be a lot to take in. Not sometimes, basically in the entire book. There's a lot to take in, and it can be a challenge. This second book, I thought I was going to feel more settled in because of the fact that it's a sequel. I knew the characters, I knew who was who. Obviously with the houses, there's so many different characters that I don't think you're expected to keep track of every single person. But the main characters and the side characters, I was very familiar with them, their personalities, their motivations. But I still felt like I was just along for the ride, but not necessarily able to fully engage in everything that was happening. And I think that's because in the first book, there is a more direct plot. I don't always need a direct plot when I'm picking up a story that is very character-driven and when it's not necessarily meant to be a heist story or something like that. But in the first one, our main character, Ren, her task is she's trying to con a noble house into believing that she's a long-lost relative and then therefore is supposed to have access to their prestige and wealth. But this house, she does not realize, is on the brink of financial collapse, and so they are very suspicious of everyone, including her, which makes her job so much harder. Seeing her trying to prove that she is this person that she is not, and then seeing how she gets swept up in the things happening in this particular city, I really enjoyed seeing all of that. But in the second book, it just felt like the plot was kind of always taking a lot of different turns. It could be because it's a middle book, and that's kind of common in middle books in series where that second book has to kind of pick up where the first one left off, but then lead into the third one. And so sometimes it can feel like multiple different plot lines. And I just found that I wish that we'd had something a little more concrete. And it meant that the stakes didn't feel as high because I didn't feel like I could fully be invested in what they were experiencing and what they had to do next. So I enjoyed it. I think a lot of people have enjoyed the second book even more than the first one. But for me, I think I liked the first one more. And I'm looking forward to the third one, especially because of where certain relationships between characters end, where we leave off, I mean. We just have shifting alliances all the time, which is fun to see. And I did enjoy all of the characters in this. And there were some really cool moments. So I described this at one point as it's kind of like if Catwoman and Batman were in a fantasy version of Venice, which sounds awesome, and it is cool. Last for today, we have some Robin Hobb. So I'm going to start with Ship of Magic, and then I'll get into Royal Assassin. So I started Ship of Magic. I am buddy reading this with Erin from Booked and Busy, as well as Steph and Katie. And we had a reading sprint recently, and that's when I started it. And it was so fun to... Erin and I both kind of started at the same time, and then Steph had gotten a little bit ahead of where we were. But it was so fun to be reading it with them. And in the chat, it was just fun. We were all hating on the character Kyle, which was a good time. But this is so interesting. So I've kind of kept myself from hearing too much about live ship because I didn't know how much of it was going to affect my reading of the Farseer trilogy, since Farseer is technically written first. And so I avoided hearing anything about live ships, even though I heard that they're pretty unrelated to each other and there's just some little things here and there. But I jumped into Ship of Magic and it is so cool. So there are these ships that you use wizard wood to, at the front of the ship, whenever they have people on the fronts of ships. At some point, when family members pass on who have owned these ships and sailed on these ships, then there will be this thing called a quickening, which is like the awakening of that being on the front of the boat, that carved being. That person will come to life, and then they help guide the ship. They keep it safe. They keep it protected from things to do with the weather, the sea, pirates, things like that. So you basically become this force out at sea. And I thought that was really interesting, but on top of that, I'm already so invested in all of the characters. It is third person with a lot of different perspectives, which is very different from Farseer, which just follows essentially Fitz in first person. So that was kind of a cool shift as well. But I am loving this. It has the potential to be a new favorite just because I think the world is so interesting, the characters are so great, and I think Robin Hobb is a gifted writer. And when I say that, I mean literally the crafting of sentences and how she describes things. I just think she's a master at it. So I am loving this so far, but Royal Assassin, this just shows me, I actually got the illustrated because I'm like, all right, Ship of Magic is awesome. So at some point I would like to just dive full on into the realm of the Elderlings. So I did get the illustrated editions, which by the way, these are amazing. The illustrated editions are great. But anyway, so Ship of Magic is fantastic. And it solidifies how great of a writer Robin Hobb is, that she can write so differently from book to book. And it also solidifies for me that I just can't stand Fitz. I can't stand Fitz. And, you know, if you were to tell me what these two books were about, these two different series, if you're like, one of them is about a guy who, because he's the illegitimate son of a noble, he is kind of a keep your enemies close sort of a life situation where nobility keeps him close, they keep him within their keep so that he can never on his own try to lay claim on the throne. But as a result, his life is not really his own, he has no freedom, and he kind of just has to obey his king and serve his king at all costs and his king in waiting. And as a result, he's just down all the time and he's feeling sad all the time. And I'd be like, I would love that because I say all the time, I love just sitting with characters and their feelings. I say that all the time. And then with live ships, if you're like, oh, there's pirates and stuff and there's magic ships, and so I'd be like, that sounds pretty cool. But the other one, tell me more about that other one where the person's just bummed all the time. And Fitz is a different kind of bummed than I usually care for. So many of you know, I love Kaladin from the Stormlight Archive with all my heart. And I do think these characters get compared a lot because they're two characters in adult fantasy. They're some of the only ones that I think a lot of us can think of where the authors really take the time to dive into how those characters are feeling, especially as male characters. To have that time to dive into these sorts of feelings too, specifically depression and sadness and grieving and things like that. These two characters, they're kind of known for that. And so I get the comparisons, and I love Kaladin. But Kaladin to me, while he does sometimes mope a little bit, we'll use that word even though there's such a negative connotation to that word. But despite that, I feel like he always does what he can for other people. He tries to constantly think of others. And he often puts himself, I'm not saying this is a healthy thing to do, but he often puts himself second so that he can do what he can to help other people. And a big balance for him is trying to learn to forgive himself when he can't save everyone. And he does have that hero's complex, but it's still a character that I feel so strongly for and I can connect with so much. And I feel like with him, sorry to be talking about Kaladin so much. Let me try to be more specific about Fitz here. Fitz is, to me, just someone who is somewhat almost selfish, because there are so many times where other people around him will be advising him, and they will be doing so from a good place because they want him and those he cares about to be safe, and they want them to be living a decent life, and they can tell when some of Fitz's actions are just going to result in pain and suffering. And so they'll tell him, Fitz, you should probably not do this thing you're doing. You should probably go this direction. And also, I'm trying not to give away spoilers, but Fitz's circumstances are a result of him being an illegitimate son to somebody of noble birth. And even though he is not holding a formal title, he still has a lot of people aware of his birth, the nature of his birth. And as a result, he is not really allowed to pursue love of his own. It's still kind of expected for him to marry whoever the king feels is a good match for him, which I completely get him being bummed about. And I usually really, really love a character who has to deal with this, oh, I don't want to go in this direction. I want more freedom in my life. But Fitz, his entire life is difficult, essentially because of the nature of his birth. And he doesn't really think that much about how any potential children of his own would find themselves in those same circumstances. And so sometimes I was like, people are literally telling him, hey, be careful when you pursue relationships with other people. Think about what would happen if you have children. You know your own life, how you kind of hate it? That's what would happen, but it'd be probably even worse because you are already somebody who doesn't have a lot of power, and he doesn't really listen, so that's frustrating. He doesn't even really think, I feel like he doesn't think that much about the person he wants to pursue, because there is this romantic subplot. He doesn't really think about, he just is like, I'm in love with them, I want to be with them, and then that person cares about him too, but then that person will be like, we should run away together, we should try to have a life together, let's leave this all behind. And he's like, no, I could never. And she's like, what if I had kids? What would you do then? And he's like, I mean, I get you a house, I guess, somewhere, and you could just like live there, maybe, and I'd provide for you. And she's like, so I'm just gonna be alone and cast out of society. And he's like, I mean, but I love you, and our love should be able to overcome anything. And it's like, it doesn't, Fitz, it doesn't overcome anything. Think about their life. So then he's sad, because then he's like, oh, if only this person would just love me. Why can't our love just be enough? And it's like, Fitz, think about them for a second. I know this is hard. I know this is difficult. And it's sad. But somehow the sadness isn't, I don't feel bad for him. I felt bad for him when he was a kid. And I was like, I bet as I read through the trilogy and he gets older, I will probably enjoy it more because I'll be seeing him experience things that adults experience and deal with and things like that. And I felt bad for him as a little child because he's a kid and he doesn't have a full grasp on his emotions. And now somehow it feels like he has an even more tenuous grasp on his emotions. It's especially frustrating because there's a character named Wintro in Live Ships who's 13, and this kid is great. I love that character so much, and he's very mature, and he's like, I just need to sit down and express myself and be clear with what I have to say. You're like, oh, Wintro. And I love Wintro. And then there's Fitz, who literally at one point, he sees the person that he loves. He was not expecting her. He was going to visit this woman that he is somewhat friends with, and she's sort of like an advisor, a mentor figure sort of to him. So he goes to visit that woman, and when he comes in, his lady love is there, and he just immediately falls to his knees, and he starts begging her, and he like grabs her hand. He's like, I love you, I can't take this anymore, I must be with you. And she gets up to leave, and he just grabs her skirts, and he's like, don't leave me. And then he realizes that either he lets go of her skirts and lets her walk away, or he trips her. That's what makes him decide to let go. And there is another servant woman in the room, and she's just like, is that what you came here to do? He's like, no. He's like, I didn't even know she would be here. I was actually coming to see this other person, but when I saw her, I was just so overcome. And like, that's how he is. And I found, gosh darn it, the perfect scene captures all my frustrations with Fitz perfectly. There are a couple character names in this moment, so I'm going to substitute one of them in. I'm going to put Susie in, and then for another character, I'm going to say Bob, just because I don't want to reveal the character names in this scene. But some setup, this is all you need to know. Fitz got some bad news, some news he's not happy about. And it says, I did not go down to dinner. I did not go up to Susie. I opened my shutters and let the storm spill rain across my floor. I let the fire go out and refused to light any candles. It seemed a time for gestures like those. When Bob opened his passage to me, I ignored it. I sat on the foot of my bed, staring out into the rain. He literally throws open his windows so that rain can soak into the floor, and then he just sits there on his bed until his fire goes out and doesn't light any candles because he wants to just sit in darkness. That's how he is the whole book, and I'm just like, come on. And maybe in the third book, because here's what I'm planning to do. After reading Royal Assassin, I was like, I need a break from Fitz. And so I'm like, I'm going to jump into Ship of Magic, because I originally was planning on finishing the Farseer trilogy before Ship of Magic. But I decided I'm gonna jump into Ship of Magic because I need a break from Fitz. And then I'm going to try to read Ship of Magic and Assassin's Quest somewhat simultaneously so that I can see the connections between the series. And I'm actually really excited to do that way. And then I'm hoping that Fitz will have matured a little bit in that third book, because at the end of the day, he is young. But what frustrates me is I don't want that to be some kind of, I don't know, like I'm putting this giant brush stroke across all teenagers, because there's a lot of teenagers in the world that are amazing, remarkable humans who have a pretty good handle on when they're feeling a certain way, they process it very maturely. And so I don't want to just be like, well, he's young, and you know how young people are. Like, I don't want to do that, because that's not how all young people are, but that's how Fitz is. So I'm hoping that in the third book, we'll see him mature a little bit. And I actually love basically all the side characters. I find them so interesting. And there's an animal companion in the second book. I loved the animal companion. Surprise, surprise. But either way, I am interested in what happens in Assassin's Quest. I'm interested in the world building things. I do think that the way the second book ended, there's some interesting reveals about the magic and a specific part of the magic too. And I'm interested to see how that picks up. I want to see what happens to some of those side characters that I really love. And then, of course, you want to finish Farseer if you're going to read some of the other series in Realm of the Elderlings. So I plan to start Assassin's Quest here. That is it for this week's reading vlog. I am planning, like I said, to continue Ship of Magic and to try and finish Farseer. I don't think that's going to happen within 1 week. I think I'll probably be reading it for a couple weeks, because both those books are enormous. I think they're both around 850 to 900-ish pages, so I will be reading those little by little. I'm going to finish up the Hero of Ages also, of course. And the Hero of Ages will have a live show for my patrons on August 1st, so if you're interested in seeing that, I'll have my Patreon linked also. And then this week, I'm hoping to dive into The Heroes, finally, by Joe Abercrombie. But anyway, let me know what you've been reading. If you've read some of these books, let me know your thoughts on them. I hope you all have a lovely rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.